As I said before, we're diving back into True Christian Religion. We're looking at the book on, the chapter on charity, which is chapter 7. And I want to start with some misunderstandings of charity. So one of the first ideas that we can get wrong is the idea that we are saved by our works or our good deeds. Swedenborg writes this: "The current belief is that charity is no more than doing good, and that then a person does no evil." Another of the misunderstandings is that Swedenborg teaches that we are saved by our works. In speaking with many Christians, when I start describing what the new church teaches in regard to charity, often people will say, well, you believe in salvation by good works. Well, no, we don't. Aside from this one, there's a couple of other passages that I'll pull out of this chapter. There are many of them, by the way, but I've chosen two more, where he makes this statement: "A person can by no means act from spiritual justice and faithfulness of himself, and no one is able to purify himself from evils by his own power and abilities." So we're not saved by our good works. And the doctrine of charity does not teach that. We have to be very clear. But then there's also the idea of what charity means. Now, following on from the last time when we looked at faith, I put up a clip on social media, and it was about this, and I was quoting these words: "Charity can no more be separated from faith than the heart can from the lungs." And I struck up a conversation because of this. Someone's posted a lot of words to ask for money. And I said, funny, I don't recall asking for money ever. And they said, charity, giving of help in the form of money. Now the thing is, when Swedenborg uses the word charity, that is not what he means. He means something entirely different, and we're going to explore that a little bit. The derivation of the word, type it into a Google search and you get this, eventually, if you go far enough down the list: Christian love of one's fellows. It comes from an old French word, from the Latin word caritas, and that comes from the word carus, which means dear. Now that is what Swedenborg means by charity: Christian love of one's fellows. If we just consider the title of this chapter, you'll see what I mean. Charity, or love towards the neighbour, and good deeds. Now we learn a lot from this title on its own. The first thing I want to say is charity and love towards the neighbour are synonyms. They're synonymous with, they mean the same thing in Swedenborg's understanding. Okay? Charity or love towards the neighbour. You could say either. But then charity and good deeds are distinct. They are different from one another. And what this chapter does is describes the relationship between the two of them. Charity can be defined as doing good to the neighbour daily and constantly. Not only to the neighbour as an individual, but also collectively. And the only way of doing this is by good and fair dealing in the position, business or work in which one is engaged, and with anyone with whom one comes into contact. Now he continues, and it's worth hearing this: a person who exercises charity in this way becomes more and more a living form of charity. For justice and faithfulness develop his mind, and exercise does his body. And in process of time, the formation of his mind prevents him from willing and thinking anything but such things as have to do with charity. These people end up by becoming like those described in the Word as having the law engraved on their hearts. Now, as he goes through this chapter, he makes a distinction between the obligations or duties of charity and what's variously translated as the benefactions or kindnesses of charity. So they're two distinct things. It is generally believed that charity consists only in giving to the poor, helping the needy, taking care of widows and orphans, making donations to the building of hospices and hospitals, hostels, orphanages, and above all churches, and to their decoration and their income. But the majority of these are not the proper work of charity, but are additional to it. It's a really interesting distinction. There's the duties of charity. There is just living a life which is honest and fair and loving towards other people. That is our duty. Doing your best in your paid employment, that is your duty. And then there are the kindnesses. There are the extra things you could do, such as giving to charity to support the poor and the needy and so on. They're the optional extras, but these days we call that charity. But that's not what Swedenborg's talking about. Swedenborg is talking about a whole of life approach. And the other thing that he points out is that charity is the internal. It's the bit you don't see about a person's life, whereas the good deeds, the good works, they are the external activities, the things that you see. And we need to understand the relationship between them. So he writes this: everyone knows that a father who chastises his children when they do wrong loves them. And in the opposite case, if he does not chastise them for it, he loves their faults. And this cannot be called charity. The purpose for which they are undertaken determines whether or not they are charitable. So it's not the thing that you do that is charity, it's the motivation behind it, the reason you do it. Something else that he writes too: no one can draw any conclusions from the morality of the external person about that of the internal, since he may be facing the opposite direction. The so-called moral man of this sort is like a highwayman in town and in the woods. In town, he adopts the role of a moral citizen, but in the woods, he preys on travellers. Swedenborg talks about degrees of the neighbour. I wonder whether you picked up on one of those previous quotes. He talks about the neighbour individually and collectively. So it's not just about how you treat an individual person, it's about how you treat society as a whole, how you treat your nation, how you treat communities of people. One of the really interesting things he says in this chapter is the paying of taxes is an act of charity. And we don't often think of it like that, do we? Think of paying of taxes as just a plain burden. And then he says that good is ultimately the neighbour. Real charity is dealing fairly and faithfully in whatever position, business or work one is engaged in, because everything a person does is of use to the community, and use is good. And then he says this: and good, leaving persons out of account, is the neighbour. That's what we are to have the greatest concern for. Good. Right, I want to focus in on three important principles in this chapter. I have to say there's a lot in it. It's well worth reading. There's so much you can think on and focus on and apply. It's a really practical chapter in many ways. So I'm going to focus on three things. First of all, I'm going to focus on the idea of acting with prudence. If you were raised in the new church, as I was, you probably had this one drummed into you. I certainly remember understanding this idea from quite an early age, I think. The idea that you don't go about giving indiscriminately. That you're acting with prudence so that good may result. So the idea is if you give to an evil man, then evil will be the end result. Give to a good person and good will be the end result. I have a few problems with it though, and things that I just want to focus in on, especially for those of you like me who've been raised in the new church. The first thing is, we can get ourselves tied in knots with this one. We can get ourselves to the point where you meet a situation, you think, well, do I or don't I? Am I doing good by this or am I doing harm? And I found this in this chapter, which I found was quite interesting and useful, because it suggests it's actually okay sometimes to get it wrong. Because he says this, because these degrees exist in the internal man, who is rarely to be discerned in the world. It is sufficient for one to love the neighbour in terms of the degrees one does know. So love the neighbour in terms of what you can see. Okay? So we find yourselves getting in that situation where you think, oh, do I or don't I? Am I going to do good by this or not? What do you see? What is plainly obvious to you? Beyond that, you have no responsibility. You cannot tell the nature of someone's internal being. And we have to remember that. We can only go on what we can see. The second thing is, I think we teach this principle of acting with prudence too young. I look back at my own life, my own upbringing, and I think the effect of it, to teach it too young, is actually to prevent children from learning the value of charity. And again, I found this in this chapter where he writes, those kindnesses are in many ways beneficial, particularly giving to the poor and to beggars. They are a means by which boys and girls, servants and maids, and generally speaking, all simple folk are introduced to charity. These are the external acts which lead people to absorb the functions of charity. They are its beginnings, and then like unripe fruit. And in the case of those who are later perfected by acquiring a proper knowledge of charity and faith, they become like ripe fruit. So I get the sense there's a very definite progression. We begin by learning the acts of charity in those sort of external ways, just by doing them without that sense of discrimination, and just believing that doing good is good. And then as you grow and mature, you get a more mature perspective and understanding of how it really applies. So that's my first principle. My second one is the idea of shunning evils as sins, and that this is the first part, the most essential part of charity. Reason itself can show anyone that insofar as the evil lodged in the will is not removed, so far is the good that he does impregnated with that evil. Remember that he was talking about this idea that to do good means you're not doing evil. It's not true. It doesn't work that way. Our need is to, first of all, shun the evils that exist within ourselves, and then our good really becomes good, because it's done without a sense of self-worth or the value or self-benefit, any of that sort of nature. Go back to what the Lord says. Matthew chapter 12, he says, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand. And you know, we exist in that state of division, having both evil and good present within us, and we need to shun the evil for the good really to take centre place. And again, Matthew chapter 15, not what goes into the mouth defiles a man, but what comes out of the mouth, that defiles a man. So it's what is within us that determines the nature of the charity that we do. And the last point I just want to dwell on is this principle of acting as if of oneself. Now, earlier we read the faith of the new church, and you might have spotted it there towards the bottom of that statement. This is the first chapter in this book where Swedenborg mentions this principle, the idea as of self, and it's a terribly important one. So we understand the good we do, if it is truly good, comes from the Lord, but we have to do it as though it comes from within us. No one is able to purify himself from evils by his own power and abilities. Yet neither can it be done without the power and abilities of man, as if these were his own. So if we do nothing, nothing happens. That's the important point. Since no one can do any good deed unless it seems to him as if his ability, will, and activity come from himself, this appearance is granted to him. And when he does it freely, as if of his own accord, it is imputed to him and accepted as the reciprocal act which brings about linking. So I just want to conclude by going back to John chapter 15, when the Lord says this, "Abide in me, and I in you." As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, bears much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing.